Good afternoon in New York and Eastern North America. Good morning, Middle and Western parts. Good evening in Ukraine, Europe and Africa and Israel. And welcome whatever time of day or night for all who are joining us from all corners of the world. I'm Yael Danieli, founder and executive director of the International Center for Multigenerational Legacies of Trauma, or ICMGLT for short. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Reparative Justice VI, Preventing the Exploitation of the Environment in War and Armed Conflict for our generations and for generations to come. Those of you who are using interpretation, please scroll down, see the little world, go to interpretation, and use the language that is good for you. Held on the International Day for Preventing the Exploitation of the Environment in War and Armed Conflict, today's International Center for Multigenerational Legacies of Trauma webinar aims at raising awareness about the critical intersection of environmental protection and armed conflict, focusing specifically on the devastating consequences of war in Ukraine. As our national and international experts would discuss, war and armed conflict have numerous damaging effects on the physical, natural, and human environment. Environmental damage in times of armed conflict impairs ecosystems and natural resources long after the period of conflict. The damage often extends beyond the limits of national territories and today's generation. New technologies used for war mean that the destruction and damage of the environment are more serious, and their long-term and multi-generational consequences would be worse. Continuing ICMGLT's webinar series on reparative justice, today's webinar follows Reparative Justice I, a conceptual introduction to reparative justice. 2, key groups of traumatized victims. 3, difficulties in listening and hearing traumatized victims, survivors, or witnesses. 4, challenges in engaging, interviewing, and supporting child victims in particular. And Reparative Justice V, challenges in engaging, interviewing, and supporting victim survivor witnesses of torture. All 5 answering the call for specialized training in reparative justice for professionals and others working with them. Participants are urged to view the 5 earlier webinars of this series prior to attending this one, and those who did not do that, please do it afterwards. Your moderator, I am a clinical psychologist, traumatologist, victimologist, and psychohistorian. Having developed the first program to help Nazi Holocaust survivors and their children in the 1970s, I have devoted much of my career to studying, treating, writing about, and preventing lifelong and multi-generational impacts of massive trauma worldwide. Also, to ensuring victims' rights, the rights of future generations, which is very relevant to today's webinar, and to reparative justice. I conceive of psychohistory as we live history in the now, not as a list of past dates, events, and numbers, but as it shapes our decisions and ways of being today. This webinar could not have happened without the tireless work of the ICMGLT's board member and chair of the Ukraine Working Group, Dr. Irina Frankova, Veronika Plotnikova, and David Donat-Katin, the co-chair of our ICMGLT's Justice Working Group. Professor David Katin, as I suggested. And as always, when we are involved with Ukrainian people and related issues, we are joined by our beloved interpreters, Natalia Gaetz and Hanna Stemkovska. Today's webinar's first speaker is Alexei Vasilyuk. Alexei is a Ukrainian environmentalist specializing in protected areas and biodiversity conservation. He graduated from Taras Shevchenko University of Kiev with a zoology degree. Since 2004, Alexei has served in the Animal Monitoring and Conservation Program at the Institute of Zoology, Ukraine National Academy of Sciences, of course. He is the author of over 700 publications dedicated to environmental protection. He is the initiator of the creation of over 16 new nature conservation areas. Our second speaker is Anastasia Kodam, co-founder and family physician at Svoye Ridny, member of NGO Academy of Family Medicine of Ukraine. Anastasia graduated from the Danilo Halsky Lviv National Medical University and specialized in family medicine and healthcare organization and management. From January 2020 until December 21, she served as coordinator of the Mental Health for Ukraine project. Anastasia is a national master trainer in mental health. Third is Natalia Gerasimenko, senior expert at GRID Aredal. Natalia specializes in advancing the environmental dimensions of conflict, disaster risk, and food security. Natalia's work aims to strengthen environmental resilience and governance through collaboration with international partners and science-based solutions. She has extensive experience working in international United Nations programs, including Food and Agricultural Organization and International Financial Corporation, and was highly involved in analytical work and preparing reports and recommendations. Our fourth speaker is Maxim Popov, an attorney at law, human rights defender, and environmental justice experts in accountability for war crime, environmental damage. Maxim was advisor to the Prosecutor General of Ukraine from October 22 to April 25, very recent, leading efforts to prosecute ecocide and environmental war crime resulting from the Russian aggression against Ukraine. His work has included law enforcement in conservation and protected areas, promoting citizens and NGOs' rights to access information and justice in environmental matters. Last but not least, bringing the international perspective here is Christopher Lenz, a legal advisor in the Register of Damage for Ukraine and lecturer in law at the University of Chicago Law School. Christopher previously served at the International Criminal Tribunals for Rwanda and for the former Yugoslavia, the Special Tribunal for Lebanon, and international residual mechanisms for criminal tribunals. He holds a Doctor of Law degree and is an active member of the International Union for Conservation of Nature's World Commission on Environmental Law. There's a lot for you to learn, a lot of us to learn. Within an hour after the conclusion of the webinar, everyone will receive the recording. We have an hour and a half for the webinar, though we have been known for a most engaged audience who keeps us longer. Each of our presenters will speak for around 8 minutes. Following an interchange among the panelists, I will open the floor for questions or brief comments from the virtual audience. I will then invite our panelists to conclude today's webinar with, quotes, last words. Please use the Q&A or the chat functions, and we will do our best to respond to as many questions and brief comments as we can. Feel free to direct your question to a particular author or panelist or to the full panel. I now have the honor of welcoming Alexei Vasilyuk. Alexei, the screen is yours.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Now I will try to share my presentation without the delays. I hope that you can see my presentation. So yeah, I'm happy to open this very important webinar, but on the other hand, this is a huge responsibility because this is the first report and speech, and this is going to actually give you some information about the context. What happens in Ukraine in terms of environmental consequences of the war, and take into account the topic and the organization which has invited me, asked me to focus on not on the scientific component, but also partially on some sort of the traumatic results of this impact. I represent organizations in Ukraine which participate in this. This is the Ukrainian Group for Protection of Nature, and also Organization of the Experts, which investigates the environmental crimes of the war. And you can read about these organizations in the internet, on their sites, and learn more about them if you will be interested in that. There are a lot of environmental consequences of the war, and we won't be able to analyze all of them during this webinar, definitely, but the matter is that to be able to understand each of those consequences, maybe we have to carry out a lot of surveys and research, but most of the research cannot be made because the front line is moving since the beginning of the war, and it's moving in the direction of the Ukrainian positions, unfortunately. And it means that all the territories which have been damaged the most and which will feel the impact of the war and the changes in the environment, and the territories which are going to require a lot of efforts to be regenerated, at present could not be accessed by us. We cannot carry out the research there, and we cannot do anything because these territories are being controlled by the Russian troops and their mind. And after the completion of the war, for a long period of time, we won't be able to research and to restore and recover the main part of those occupied territories. This is a new reality, which we have never seen before. And at present, we can do some, distance surveys and research. And also, we have to take into account our knowledge about these territories, which we had in the previous years. I have identified several top factors which impact and change the environment, and all the rest factors are less, grave from the point of view of duration. Well, first of all, the explosions of the munitions, and any explosion and the damage which was caused by the missiles will bring about the explosion. That is, the chemicals explode, and this means that all the chemicals actually pollute the environment.
And unfortunately, Russia uses huge amount of old munition, but we don't know how many of them. We cannot even assess approximately, but we know that 100% of that is now in the environment. And that makes it possible for us to extrapolate. For example, this is a satellite picture of one of the land plots in Kharkiv region in the eastern part of Ukraine, so that you can see how many traces of explosions we have in some areas. And apart from landscape of transformation and killing animals and plants, these territories for a long period will be chemically polluted, because an explosion always leaves some chemicals on the surface. You cannot remove that, you cannot clean the territory, it will remain there. And considering that some of the plots look the way as you can see now on the slide, there is a huge risk that part of the territories for a long period of time will be just not accessible for living because of chemical pollution. And we estimated the situations because previously one of top countries that spoke about environmental consequences of the war, that was Kuwait. But the territory affected in Ukraine is 7 times the territory of Kuwait. So the world has not yet witnessed this scale. The second factor is that Russia targets technogenically hazardous facilities. For example, chemical factories, as well as storages of fuel. Well, fuel storages maybe are attacked to prevent that the Ukrainian army has fuel, but where they attack large supermarkets, for example, their warehouses, we understand that that's just for the sake of damaging the environment, because then there will be a lot of smoke, and as a result of this incineration, of this burning, the living standards go down. The third factor is where the fires, as a result of shellings, spread to natural territories. And these are mine territories, so nobody can go there and try and extinguish those fires. These are mined territories where there are active hostilities, so this fire spread to huge areas, and until they consume everything that can burn. This is localization of fires recently in Ukraine, and you can see that this is very much in line with the front line. But there are 2 cases that are special cases. The first one, maybe you've heard about that. That's destruction of Kakhovka reservoir. That is more than 2,000 square kilometers, and Russians destroyed the dam. As a result, the water went down, huge territory, settlements, national reserves was flooded, and a lot of potable water, and that was significantly polluted with chemicals, went to the Black Sea. That was the largest historically case of using technogenic factors for military purposes. However, this case, well, this is what the territory of the national park looks in the south of Ukraine when this happened, but unexpectedly we see that young forest starts growing in that territory. And that's the only, at least slightly positive aspect of that story, because we can see that in the southern part of Ukraine for the first time for a long period of time, we see now 2,000 square kilometers of new young forest, which is climatically very resilient, by the way. And researchers are now exploring this phenomenon, including our team, but that's hard because this is the forest on the contact line between the Ukrainian and the Russian armies. So it's hard to conduct expeditions there, even though we've had some short ones. However, the rest of territories, apart from the Hovka Reservoir, they do not turn into wildlife. So we could expect that, okay, we withdraw from a territory and after a while it is restored, regenerated. But now, unfortunately, most of those territories are dry and the authentic plants do not grow there. There are some aggressive plants that are growing there, which do not recover the natural balance. We can see the satellite picture of Ukraine, and you can see the front line not as a black land plot. This is the green spot, right? But that's bad news. That's not good news. This is the alien plants in our continent. It is the largest spot of that, and that means that all the explosives are somewhere under roots of those young trees. So how can we get them out from there? It is not really clear. And by the way, the territories affected, they were very valuable. There were rare and endemic species, plants and animals that only grow in those territories, nowhere else. So we have lost lots of valuable species and we didn't gain anything. We gain a super problem, and this is the slide that I wanted to focus on. So far, official estimation is that the mining will take 750 years. And of course, it is hard to imagine considering our lifespan. But I believe that these estimations, well, I don't know how they will be revised when it becomes clear that this territory is now covered with trees. How it's possible? Is it possible to demine a territory if you cannot get to those explosives? So maybe this problem will be even worse, will deteriorate. I know that in other countries, in France, there are large territories that were left behind after the First World War because they were significantly damaged by the war. The largest forest next to Berlin, it is still not demined, and you can only walk there on paths, and Germans got used to that, but they did not manage to demine that territory. I'm afraid that we should expect that. We already have Chernobyl zone in Ukraine. That's different. That's a territory contaminated with radiation, but unfortunately, Ukrainians had to leave that territory. And of course, we are not discussing if it is good or bad and what to do about it. We cannot do anything about radiation, but we understand that it may happen so that after this war, huge territories will remain inaccessible for people to come back, and it will be longer than 2 or 3 generations. And that means that people should expect a lot of disappointment, because many people believe that after the end of the war, they will be able to come back. But if they can only come back after several generations, that's not what they expect, right? So this brings us back to that traumatic experience that is very different from what we ever had before. I see that my time is over, and let me wrap up by saying that we already must start revising what Ukraine is going to be further on, not about how we are going to recover what we had before, but how we are going to develop a different attitude and relations with the territory, with the geography. Even now, we understand that recovering what we had 4 years ago would not be possible, at least till the end of our life and the next generations. And photography, this is the beautiful picture of the young forest. There was this reservoir 2 years ago, but now this is the largest willow forest in the southern part in Ukraine, the largest in Eastern Europe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexei. It actually hurts to listen to you while looking at this beautiful land. Further, we will go to the more psychosocial effects. And Anastasia, please, the screen is yours.
Hello, I hope that you can see my screen and you can hear me well. Okay. So I am Anastasia Hodan. I'm a family doctor and co-founder of the Свои Рідні International Master Trainer in Mental Health and WHO program MHGAP. So today I'm going to speak about the impact of the tragedy in Kakhovka Dam and the impact on the mental health of Ukrainians, because me and my team, we explored the mental health status of Kherson residents and residents of the region. So I will share this information with you. And my task today is to speak about the tragedy and its effect on Ukrainians. And basically, this is a greater challenge that it may seem, because, okay, there was an event and then there are some consequences. That seems to be quite straightforward. But can we separate the impact on Ukrainians of this ecocide crime, of this crime of war, where Russian troops destroyed the dam? That's just one of the many crimes against humanity that we observe on the almost online on the daily basis. Maybe not. So let's try and figure out. We will use the available data and research data in order to better understand the situation, how war is connected with mental health. Let's think about two models. The first, biopsychosocial model. And this was the model that was developed in 1977 in order to explain the principle of development of mental disorders. And 2002, WHO used this model to explain development of any condition. That it appears not only because of somatic reasons, but that's a combination of various factors. And what are those factors? Biological factors, age, gender, hereditary factors, psychological factors, our character, coping strategies, and social. That's what's around us. When these factors are combined, a disease, a condition may develop. So if we speak about mental health disorders for Ukrainians, the greatest risk factor is the social factor, that's the war, which significantly aggravates the risk of development of various disorders, physical or mental. The second model, let's look at the screen. And this is the visual presentation of the very notion of health. It was developed by WHO in 1948 after the end of the Second World War. And that was the first time when the notion of human dignity was defined in the Declaration on Human Rights. So what is health? It exists on the intersection of the three circles, and this is physical, psychological, and social well-being. So let's look on the screen and see the factors that impact you in the situation of the war. Acute distress, violence, impact on physical health because of poor environmental factors, among other things, inaccessibility of medical care, loss of home, loss of dear ones, displacement, this is something that had a significant effect on Ukrainians, including residents of Kherson region after destruction of Kakhovka Dam. We have information from WHO about destruction of healthcare facilities with those floods, and that killed people and animals, that destroyed homes. We know that they attacked humanitarian boats and humanitarian first aid points. We know about the situation where many people had to be displaced, and that's in the territories that are controlled by the Ukrainian government. And what's going on in temporarily occupied territories, that's more than half of the region of Kherson region, it is temporarily occupied. So we don't know what's happening to those people. We can only find out this information after those territories are liberated. And I'm afraid to look forward and think about what we will discover. So what happens to those people who live not just in Kherson region, but in the entire territory of Ukraine? So have you thought about the difference of this war from the previous wars? And how and why it's not going to be the same? This war is different because for the first time ever, we observe everything online. We are always online. We observe all the movements, displacement, and so on and so forth. And that gives us some advantages because we know where people need help. We can look for dear ones using this network of people online. We know where we need to donate funds, where they need volunteers. At the same time, that's very traumatizing. I understand that most of you scroll down the videos, horrible videos from Ukraine, and you're right, because that's hard to take in all of that. But we cannot scroll down because we look for our dear ones. We check if everything is okay with them, if that's not our house. So millions of people simultaneously observe the most horrible aspects and consequences of Kakhovka Dam destruction online without the opportunity to influence, to change anything. And I should say that I don't add any photos to this presentation, those photos that were made in the tragedy, during the tragedy, because for me, looking at those photos is traumatic. And I live 1,000 kilometers away from Kherson region. I mean, I live far from the place. But anyway, I still have these flashbacks with those videos. And when I was preparing this presentation, I had that. According to research, even observing a catastrophe may result in PTSD in humans. And well, we don't have the data, but I can imagine that millions of Ukrainians follow that online. So can we say that some hypothetical Ukrainian can be in good physical health, coping strategies, good social support, and is absolutely healthy? No, we cannot say that because social well-being, unfortunately, is undermined for all Ukrainians. In the report, WHO report, it is stated that 3 years of full-scale war and 11 years of the war in total had a significant impact on health of Ukrainians. And according to recent assessments of WHO from October 2024, 68% of Ukrainians say that their health is now worse than before the war. And mostly this is about mental health. This is 46% of people. Mental disorder 41%, neurological disorder 31%. And this is more than 100% because one person may have several issues, right? So that's more than 100. If we compare 2022, when the full-scale invasion started, and 2023, after the Kakhovka HPP tragedy, we see a smaller percentage of Ukrainians who assess the state of their mental health as normal, from 41% to 38%. It reduced. What about mental health of Kherson citizens, those who live in the region that was most affected? As of autumn 2023, several months after the destruction of the dam, Kherson residents assess their psychological state as 2.69 points out of 5. Most respondents say that their state deteriorated in the recent months. This is more than 50% of residents of Kherson. 47% of ex-residents said that their mental state was worse. We don't know if that's coincidence or result of the tragedy, but obviously we cannot separate this factor from the general factor of the war, occupation. So all of those factors result in progressing deterioration of mental health of Kherson residents. And here you can see the assessment, self-assessment of Kherson residents of consequences of destruction of Kherson Dam. And second top factor is the impact on the mental health. And this is more important than losing house, you see. So it means that mental suffering, mental distress may be even worse than physical damage.
Absolutely.
According to Index of Health Index research in Ukraine, this is annual research, the greatest impact on mental health was in Kherson region. 78.7% of Kherson residents spoke about that. And frankly speaking, that breaks my heart each time that I see.
And now look at the top 3 emotions which are experienced by the Kherson residents. This is the fatigue and the hope. And I would like to conclude by the quote. This is a branch with a fresh green living core. When it is twisted, the branch bends, does not break, but instead of relaxing and continuing to grow. This is a quote from George Williams, psychologist at Harvard University. I was talking about quite negative things today, but we still have hope in the hearts of all Ukrainians. And I would like to tell you that this branch is never going to be broken. And this green branch is going to continue growing until we attain the victory. We believe in it, and we also believe in justice, which is going to heal our wounds. And here I would like to pass the floor to our next speaker, and thank you for attention, and I am ready to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Anastasia.
Дякую, Анастасія, щиро.
For this comprehensive and sad picture. Thank you for finishing with a note of hope. Natalia, the screen is yours.
Good afternoon, good evening. I hope that you can hear me. I'm going to share my presentation now. Well, can you see my presentation? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Great. So let us start. I am going to introduce myself. I'm Natalia Gerasimenko, and I'm a representative of those Ukrainians who were compelled to live abroad at present, but nevertheless, they hope to come back and they believe in our victory. At present, I am working in the environmental organization, which is named the Great Arendal. Arendal is the city of Norway, and this organization was founded quite a long time ago. We're adults, actually, and we are working a lot with UNEP, that is United Nations Environmental Program, to take care about the environment. And we are working on the issues which are related to the impact of war and military conflicts on environment. On this slide, you can see several works we have done. We jointly with the UNEP carried out a research in 2022 on the impact of the war against Ukraine on environment. This research is placed on our website. It is accessible. And also we have carried out a research in Ukraine which dealt with the dangerous materials, asbestos in particular, and the contamination by asbestos. So this is also the result of the war. And we are working on with the OECD to decrease the risks of the natural disasters. And also on this slide, you can see that we have carried out a research and assessment of the impact of the conflict in Gaza, the impact on the environment. So we are going to share, I'm going to share the information about this. My colleagues have told you a lot about this. And on this slide, you can see a number of certain information which actually was shared with you already. We were talking about the fact that the war, unfortunately, carries out a lot of damages. And unfortunately, the war is going on and the damages are being inflicted. Here at this slide, I would like to attract your attention to the issues which are related to agriculture. We remember that Ukraine has always been considered to be the breadbasket of Ukraine. But unfortunately, this breadbasket at present has been attacked by the enemies, the mice who represent the enemies. And the research is being done by the School of Economics and the government of Ukraine, and they are assessing the damage to the agriculture of Ukraine. And in accordance to the latest data, the direct and the indirect losses in agriculture can be actually assessed at the level of 80 billion US dollars, and lots of funds will be needed to recover the Ukrainian agriculture. At this slide, you can see the information which we've got from our partners who are carrying out the research on regular basis about the scope of the emissions of CO2. And you can see in particular that in accordance with the latest data for the 3 years of the war against Ukraine, the scope of the CO2 emissions into the atmosphere is equal to the annual emissions of Austria, Hungary, and Czech Republic, Slovakia combined. And this happened in Ukraine for the last 3 years. And if we look at the social costs of CO2 emissions. So in accordance with the calculations, the climatic damage also equals to more than 43 billion US dollars. At this slide, we also provide you with information which was already given to you by my co-speakers. And this is about the damage to the forests of Ukraine and due to the fires in the forests, and they could be compared with the area could be compared with 1 million of the soccer pitches. And well, some of the forests are being regenerated naturally, but unfortunately, we do not have access to all those areas. And we hope that the programs which are being implemented in Ukraine will give us an opportunity to recover our environment to the extent possible. And my colleagues also mentioned the very, very sad data, and these are very sad pictures. When we were carrying out our first survey and research, we've got a lot of information about the dolphins who have been killed in the Black Sea. And this information was provided not only by Ukrainian sources, but also from Turkish sources. And it is difficult to count or calculate because the data was estimate data. well, proceeding from the number of dead dolphins which were found, and they were extrapolated to the potential number of dolphins. But you can see the damage to the environment is being made not only surface on the ground and not only in the forest, but also in the water resources and everything which is connected to it. And I'd like to remind you of the fact that in Ukraine, we have 35% of the European biodiversity. And unfortunately, it is being damaged and we have a lot of losses thereof. And you can see 1 of the million hectares of protected areas in the areas which are located under protection have been affected by the war. And I don't want to finish my presentation on a negative note. We would not be Ukrainians if we would not find some positive aspects in this situation. At this slide, I would like to demonstrate the following information. These are the information about busy bees. This was the project which was initiated. It was a joint project of the Ministry of the Economy and our agrarian companies. You can see the names of those companies on the slide. And this project has a goal to disseminate information about the necessity of demining. This project is called the Honey from the Mined Areas. And the essence of the project that with the help of the drones, the fields which were mined have been sown to grasses, and the bees were picking the honey from that. And this honey was disseminated by various means through the diplomatic missions as well, and to attract attention of the international community to the necessity to demine those areas. And my colleague said that actually we need 750 years to demine those areas. And the more efforts we are taking in this respect, the sooner this process is going to be completed. So we really are very grateful to all the assistance we are getting in this area. We look forward to the end of the war, and we would like our efforts to recover our land would be completed, and they will be directed and focused on the regeneration of the environment. I would like to finish my presentation by the following. Our organizers mentioned that today we are marking the International Day for Preventing of Exploitation of the Environment, and we have to prevent the conflicts. And we can say that if it is not possible to prevent the conflicts, and it was also mentioned in 2022 by the resolution of UNEA, we have to be very careful and very attentive to the question of documenting the damage, to the question of assessing this damage. And we have to collect all the necessary data information so that equity, which we are talking about today, would happen. And I believe that the next speaker is going to tell about it in more detail. Thank you very much for your attention. And I would like to pass the floor to the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Natalia. Thank you for the honey. The ICMGLT is waiting for our little jar and to show it to everybody and to Maxime, you have an amazing job to do in your presentation after these brilliant colleagues' presentation. Go ahead, my dear. Yes, thank you.
First of all, I'd like to express my gratitude for the invitation to be a part of this important discussion in this important International Day of the Preventing of Exploitation of the Environment during the armed conflict. I was already introduced, so it's a big honor again, dear participants and attendees. Thank you for your participation as well. I would like to focus my brief remarks and presentation on the work that I was engaged in through last almost 3 years, starting from full-scale invasion in 2022 of Russian Federation in Ukraine. I was an advisor to the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, basically focusing on the issues of individual criminal responsibility for the wartime environmental damage. And I would like to start with the motto that was driving us in 2022. It is quite a famous phrase of the former Prosecutor General of Ukraine, Andrei Kostin, that environment should no longer be the silent victim of war. Before 2022, I did the research and I found a lot of articles where it was emphasized that environment is considered as a silent victim of war. So Ukraine, on a high political level, decided to change this approach and to try to set a precedent of individual criminal responsibility for wartime environmental damage. My colleagues already shared with you with some numbers of the and some statistics regarding the environmental damage resulted by the Russian aggression against Ukraine. So I will not focus here. I will just name two numbers. One is the $144 billion US. It's the calculation of the damages that is being provided by the ministry, former Ministry of Environmental Protection, right now is the Ministry of Economy, Agriculture and Environment. And also the second number is the number of criminal cases that have been registered so far by the Prosecutor General's Office and law enforcement agencies in Ukraine. So it's 321 cases with the legal qualification, the war crime. And among these cases, there are 12 criminal cases with the additional legal qualification ecocide. You already have heard that the most famous and the biggest probably environmental war crime case or incident that caused extensive environmental damage, I would say environmental disaster, was the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam on the 6th of June 2023. As a result of this attack by the Russian Federation, the biggest artificial water reservoir in Europe basically was drained. The territory, approximately 610 square kilometers, were flooded. 35 people dead as a result of this attack, and there is an extensive environmental damage. I will provide you the links to few analytical documents that basically shows the whole picture of the environmental damage resulted by this attack. In order to make it happen, to create this precedent, the proper structure has been established within the Prosecutor General's Office and regional prosecutors' offices. First of all, within the specialized environmental prosecutor's office, the special unit of prosecutors was created, and this unit was specifically in charge on prosecuting environmental war crimes and ecocide cases resulted by the Russian aggression against Ukraine. Also, extensive coordination has been established internally and externally. Internally, coordination included other department that is in charge of other international crimes committed in course of Russian aggression. We call it War Crime Department. And external coordination included, first of all, the cooperation with the Ministry of Environmental Protection and State Environmental Inspectorate. That is the body that was in charge and empowered by the government basically to document all incidents of war damage resulted by Russian aggression. As for the legal framework, I will say a few boring things. My apologies for those who are not lawyers. So there are some provisions in international humanitarian law. Basically, this is a law that governs how the parties to the conflict should behave. So we have such rules. It's strange, but indeed we have it. So we have additional Protocol 1 to the Geneva Conventions, and there are two specific articles, Article 35 and Article 55, that specifically mentions the necessity to care about the natural environment. So literally, it is written there that it is prohibited to employ methods or means of warfare which are intended or may be expected to cause widespread, long-term, and severe damage to natural environment. So that is the basis for the criminal proceedings from IHL. Also, in our domestic criminal code, that is the main source of law for the prosecutors and investigators, there are two specific articles that have been used. These are the Article 438 that prescribes criminal responsibility for the war crimes, and the Article 441 that prescribes the criminal responsibility for the crime of ecocide. And under the ecocide, you can see here the definition, how Ukraine understands today the ecocide. Ecocide is a mass destruction of flora and fauna, poisoning of air or water resources, and also any other actions that may cause an environmental disaster. I would also mention here, since Ukraine is already finally the member state to the Rome Statute, that Prosecutor General's office established the cooperation with the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, who opened the field office in Kyiv in 2023. And under the Rome Statute, there are also a number of legal options how to frame and qualify wartime environmental damage. One, and the famous one, is Article 8.2b4, because it specifically mentions the damage to natural environment with the criteria or with the threshold as a widespread, long-term, and severe. Basically, the war crime is intentionally launching an attack in the knowledge that such attack will cause incidental loss of life or injury to civilians or damage to civilian objects, or widespread, long-term, and severe damage to the natural environment, which would be clearly excessive in relation to the concrete and direct overall military advantage anticipated. There are also other possibilities for the Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC, Article 8.2a4, extensive destruction and appropriation of property not justified by military necessity. It may cover natural resources such as land, water, forest. Also, Article 8.2b13 and 8.2be12, destroying or seizing the enemy's property unless such destruction or seizure by imperatively demanded by the necessities of war. And also the use of prohibited types of weapons, chemical or biological, that cause large-scale pollution, even if environmental damage is incidental. Also, the Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC may use the war crime as an attack on a civilian object. Under the rules of international humanitarian law, natural environment is considered as a civilian object. Therefore, any direct attack against the natural environment may be considered as a war crime. Hopefully, Ukraine was not alone through this path, and we obtained extensive support of our friends and allies. First of all, the big initiative that has been established by the European Union, United States of America, and Great Britain, the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group. It operates through 5 implementing entities and provides crucial technical and legal support to Ukrainian prosecutors and investigators. Also, we established extensive cooperation with the civil society organizations, national and international and foreign. We established the platform that gathers more than 25 such national and international NGOs in thematic cluster to combat environmental crimes. I would also mention that at that point, the political will to set this precedent was extremely high. Therefore, the office of the president of Ukraine established the high-level working group on environmental consequences of war that was co-chaired by the Margot Wallström and Andriy Yermak, and their job was basically to create the comprehensive document how state should deal when there is an ongoing armed conflict to bring justice for the wartime environmental damage. As a result of this cooperation, number of important, from my perspective, documents has been produced or prepared that unfortunately, may be useful for other jurisdictions and states who suffers from ongoing or past conflicts. First of all, it's Environmental Compact for Ukraine. That is the document that has been prepared by this high-level working group on environmental consequences of war, and it contains 50 recommendations addressed directly to the states, in our case to Ukraine, and to international community. What should be done in order to solve three crucial things: to document properly damage and reduce risks, to ensure accountability for the war crime environmental damage, and to ensure green reconstruction and building a green economy. Also, in cooperation with the NGO Climate Council and the ACA experts, we made the guide to identifying and framing environmental war crimes in Ukraine. This document basically gathers all possible legal options that may be employed by prosecutors, investigators to deal with wartime environmental damage. Also, there is an example of the report. It's called Submerged report that was produced by the Truth Hounds and Project Expedite Justice, basically gathering OSINT data and reports on environmental damage of the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam. This report was used by the prosecutors as an evidence in this criminal case. Also, there is the link to UNEP Rapid Environmental Assessment report on the Kakhovka Dam breach. It was mentioned today already. Time. Okay. Due to the fact that we today are trying to discuss these issues through the perspective of victims, I decided to include to the presentation the definition of the victim under the Ukrainian law. And the victim is a victim in criminal proceeding may be an individual who has sustained moral, physical, or material damage as a result of a criminal offense, as well as a legal entity that has sustained a material damage. It's important to mention that it's not only people who made the complaint or the application to the law enforcement agencies, because the victim shall also be a person who has not filled the report, but who suffered damage as a result of criminal offense and who consequently, after criminal proceedings have been instituted, lodged the application for being involved in criminal proceedings as a victim. I would just mention that in only one Kakhovka Dam case, there are more than 8,000 people recognized as the victims in one criminal case. There are also some results of our work. Probably I would mention them during the Q&A sessions because I see that there is a lack of time. So at this point, I just want to go quickly to the impact of such work and briefly say that Ukrainian efforts to investigate and prosecute environmental war crimes resulted by Russian aggression made a huge impact. First of all, its attempt, I believe successful attempt to create a precedent. Also, it is a guide for other states. And these efforts became a catalyst for the advocacy campaign on the recognition of ecocide as an international crime. And the last thing that I want to mention that on this basis, in 2024, the Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC launched a campaign on drafting and preparation of the policy on environmental crimes under the Rome Statute. That means that finally the international criminal mechanism, such as International Criminal Court, hopefully will pay attention in its work to environmental war crimes as well. Thank you so much for your attention. I will be here and waiting for the Q&A session. And right now, I'd like to pass the word to my colleague, Christopher Lenz, who will also, I believe, will tell you some legal but interesting things. Christopher, please.
Thank you very much, Maxime. This webinar is so clearly a learning experience with many learning documents. So please put in the chat everything that you might suggest, because as I mentioned to the panel at our rehearsal, our webinars in fact become learning tools around the world. Amazing. But of course, we want the international perspective from Christopher, and I look forward to the ensuing discussion as well. Chris, the floor or the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Daniele. It's an honor to be part of this conversation. I'm grateful to the ICMGLT for convening us today. Obviously important topics. As you said, I've learned quite a bit already. I have copious notes in my notebook right in front of me. So I'm looking forward to participating in the exchange as soon as it begins. May be helpful to start by saying that I wear many different hats in relation to the topics under discussion. So I should clarify right away that I'm speaking only in my personal capacity today. And, you know, reflecting on the contributions already of the panelists, you know, I think it really brings out the reason that we commemorate today as the International Day. We heard from Alexei and we heard from Natalia different aspects of the severe environmental consequences that can arise from an armed conflict. Anastasia spoke eloquently about the mental and the psychological and psychosocial health consequences that can be experienced as a consequence of warfare. And this really emphasizes, I think, the reason that we commemorate today, and that's to seek the prevention, emphasis on prevention of the exploitation of the environment in war and armed conflict. Today is the 25th such International Day. And although a lot of success and progress has been made in that respect, one couldn't have listened to my co-panelists' contributions without recognizing that prevention does not always succeed. And that when it doesn't succeed, it's important that together we seek to pursue and to secure justice for the victims of international crimes that have brought about damage or destruction to the environment. So in the international sphere, but I think also in the national spheres, there's traditionally a focus on individual criminal responsibility. And Maxime addressed this very clearly in his presentation, the desire and the need to ensure that persons who are most responsible or bear some criminal liability for the environmental harm or destruction can be arrested, tried, and if convicted, sentenced to a term of years or to life imprisonment. And on the international side, there's quite a substantial number of gaps, let's say, in the international legal framework. Maxime addressed the extent to which the National Prosecutor's Office in Ukraine is pursuing these cases, and rightly so. It's really much more challenging to pursue environmental or to pursue criminal responsibility arising from environmental damage in the international system. The Rome Statute has only a few provisions that might clearly be thought to apply to environmental destruction. Again, Maxine's slides walked us through those. And there's no such provisions in relation to the other crimes against humanity or genocide or the crime of aggression. So there's increasingly a desire at the international level, and not just a desire, but real movement to try to close some of these legal gaps. And I can address this more in the Q&A later if it's helpful, but we can see it, for example, in efforts to add environmental destruction as an enumerated crime against humanity. There's been substantial movement in that respect. Discussions surrounding the possibility of adding ecocide as a fifth international crime under the Rome Statute. And I think special mention really should be made of the ICC prosecution's draft policy on environmental crimes, which is really an effort to streamline and to mainstream environmental considerations in some of the charging decisions, to look at how environmental trauma impact can play a role in genocide, in crimes against humanity, and not just in the charging decisions, but also in relation possibly to the sentencing of perpetrators if they're convicted. So we see a lot of movement on the international side in individual criminal responsibility. But we also see that there's a lot more to be done. And we know that justice can take many forms, and there's many components to justice. So we're seeing also a lot of initiative to not only pursue individual criminal responsibility, but also to pursue state responsibility, where a state is responsible for an internationally wrongful act, and that internationally wrongful act has caused damage, loss, or injury, then the state is responsible under customary international law to make full and effective reparations. And full and effective reparations take many forms. One of them is restitution, seeking to put the victims back in the original position that they were before the crime. We heard today that can be very challenging. It might take centuries in relation to environmental crimes. There's also rehabilitation, which is especially seen in relation to providing medical or psychological support that might be needed for victims in order to rehabilitate and recover from the crimes and the harms they've suffered through the environmental destruction that we're discussing today. There's guarantees of non-repetition, which might look like efforts at increasing rule of law or other structural reforms that can minimize the likelihood of increasing harm. There's satisfaction, and here a penal sanction for the people most responsible is especially relevant. And there's also the aspect of seeking and securing compensation, financial compensation for the material or moral damage for any economically determinable consequences that arise from the internationally wrongful acts of the state. And we see that in a few different ways, including most recently in the Register of Damage for Ukraine, which is, and again, I'm speaking in my personal capacity, but one can readily see on the website for the Register of Damage for Ukraine, and I'll put this in the chat so that everybody has it at their fingertips, there are a number of claims categories that anticipate claims for environmental damage, for the pillaging or the appropriation of natural resources. There's a category specifically on demining and the clearance of unexploded ordnance. And I note 2 sets of slides in particular reference this. So these are amongst the international efforts that are really being undertaken to try to bring justice and to try to minimize the harm done to present generations and to future generations from environmental destruction and damage that arises in armed conflict. I note that all of the other participants ended their presentations on a note of positivity, and I'll endeavor to do the same. And it's really to note that this conversation is one of many efforts, really part of the momentum that is being sustained across the international community of states, across civil society organizations, across citizens around the world to ensure that there is justice when environmental criminal acts occur. And that momentum is something that we need to maintain, but also can give us hope for optimism, I believe, moving forward.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for adding for also acknowledging Anastasia's contribution to the concept of environmental crime, and in particular to the concept of environmental victim. Maxime, in your presentation, it's not, the psychological damages are not acknowledged. Now, this is not only the 25th anniversary of the environmental issue. This year is the anniversary of the United Nations Declaration on Principles of Justice for Victims of Crime and Victims of Abuse of Power. And already then, here we have it. I'm sharing the screen, and please also, it's too small for us to see. Can you make it bigger by any chance? No, not the page, but well, whatever. See how much bigger you can make the font. Oh, good. Move on to, please move on to here, just a moment, right here. Let me just point out nonchalantly, just on the third paragraph here, recognizing that the victim of crime and victims of abuse of power, and also frequently their families, witnesses, and others who aid them, are unjustly subjected to loss, damage, and injury, and that they, in addition, may suffer hardship when assisting in the prosecution of offenders. If you scroll down to the definition, please keep going. Go ahead here. Go ahead to the annex, right? Okay, go ahead to number 1. Victim means persons who individually or collectively have suffered harm, including physical or mental injury, emotional suffering, economic loss, or substantial impairment of their fundamental rights through acts of omissions that are in violation of criminal laws operative within member states, including those laws prescribing criminal abuse of power. And number 2, you can see a person who may be considered a victim under this declaration, regardless of whether the perpetrator is identified, apprehended, prosecuted, or convicted, and regardless of the familial relationship between the perpetrator and the victim. The term victim also includes, where appropriate, the immediate family or dependents of the direct victim and persons who suffered harm in intervening to assist victim in distress or to prevent victimization, etc., etc. I participated in writing this one and all other victim-related instruments to date. And and particularly after Anastasia's brilliant presentation, where is that aspect in the Ukrainian definition? So sorry for bringing that up first, but this was adopted 25 years ago by the General Assembly. So maybe Maxime or Chris, you want to, if you start with ecocide, yeah, the focus is on the environment. It's an interesting paradox here. Please, and everybody here can, please, this is our dialogue. So each one of you can contribute. You don't need to to unmute. You can simply unmute. Go ahead, Maxime.
Okay, I will just briefly clarify. Probably I did it too fast. So basically, the definition of the victim in the criminal procedural code of Ukraine specifically encompasses that the victim is a person who suffered not only material or physical damage, but also moral damage.
Right, but that's we had that in mind when we said no, we have to be far more specific.
Yes,
because
probably
say emotional, psychological.
Yeah, I can agree with you, but here also, hopefully, it's not just the only legal act that may be used when deciding if person obtained moral damage. We have also the civil code, where is the definition of the moral damage more extensively. It may help basically the prosecutor and investigator to recognize the person as a victim in a lot of cases of trauma or psychological damage as well. So I would say just briefly that the definition that we have in Article 55 of the Criminal Procedural Code is quite good, because it's provide the possibility for the investigator and prosecutor to provide the status of victim to person who suffered morally, psychologically, and obtained trauma. That would be my answer.
Thank you. Governments run away to the word moral, as if it has exact meaning and the same shared meaning by everyone. And we all know that it just doesn't. So thank you very much. Go ahead. You have listened to each other. I'm sure you have many thoughts and questions.
So, Dr. Daniele, I was just going to react to your point right now, just to reflect that the definition of victims that you referred to is also set out effectively broadly in the basic principles on the right to a remedy for victims. Yep. So you're well aware of that, and now our audience will be reminded of that.
I made sure of that.
But as you say, it reflects not just that the victim of, in a criminal sense, that there's a direct victim, although there might also be that, but that the victims can be considered in a broader, especially in a more collective sense. And that strikes me as particularly suitable if the environmental destruction impacts, entire communities, and frequently environmental harm, as we've seen, will impact and perhaps, the present and future generations of communities. And sometimes not only does it happen to impact these communities, but sometimes the environmental destruction is done specifically in order to ensure lasting harm that will cause widespread repercussions across generations. I think Alexei referenced this at one point, where he talked about, gave some examples where maybe environmental damage was a corollary of armed conflict, but sometimes where it might seem to be the very purpose of that, where the harm is being done in order to impact civilians and others, not just for present time, but also for for a long period of time. And so I think we're seeing discussions of why exactly this realization should lead to increasing movement to ensure that the international framework can easily recognize, acknowledge, and capture this harm that we're really starting to see potentially in a lot more of the armed conflicts around the world. Again, where it's not individual victims, although they are also individual, but also social groups and community-based victims. And I think your definition that you've apparently contributed into the international community really can help reflect that.
Thanks. I was wondering, Alexei, what were your thoughts when you listened to others? And I would ask that of each one of you, so you can just contribute, please.
Так, звичайно.
Well, definitely. As for me, it's a new topic. But I share the opinion and the idea that environmental consequences are going to affect a lot of generations to come. And Ukrainians and not only Ukrainians, because environmental consequences, it's a global thing. And actually, they will affect a lot of countries because the polluted air is going to be spread not only in Ukraine, but in your countries as well. And well, in a couple of days, all these the air is going to be polluted in a lot of countries, and a lot of people are going to be born without knowing that the quality of their life is going to be much worse than it could have been if it was not for the destruction of the environment. And it's very important for everybody to understand that and know it, and maybe this will affect the issues of the safety and security in the future, because the experience could be collected, and we have to collect the information about this damage. And this will be very important not only for reparations, but just for understanding of the damage to the environment. And well, people have to understand that. And this is painful to learn very bad news. And it's very difficult for people to accumulate this negative knowledge. But this negative knowledge will help us to, first of all, make us think about the similar events to be repeated in the future. That's why the overcoming trauma, I live in Ukraine, and definitely I am traumatized, and I have a traumatizing experience every day. But well, one thing is to heal the trauma of each individual, but to provide the information to the next generations. And people will be born after the end of the war, and they might not think about the former war. I was raised by my grandma, who was participating in the World War II, and she was telling a lot of stories about that. And she was 95, and she still was talking about the war, which was finished 50 years ago. And this is very relevant even today. And now I understand that this is really very relevant. And the psychologists were not working with my grandma, and she was not, her trauma was not healed, but I was using her experience. That is a different aspect, and it's very important for all of us to use the knowledge which we have accumulated to prevent the similar events to take place in the future, and to use this knowledge very efficiently to create the security of the people. Maybe 20 years will pass and people will think, well, we can come to that area and start living there because it's a beautiful area. There are lots of trees and a beautiful forest, but people will forget that this will be simply dangerous to live in this area.
Thank you. May I add that both for World War II and for Chernobyl, we have webinars about the multi-generational effects on our website, as Irina put in the chat. So thank you for mentioning that, Alexei. It's extremely important. And in terms of that definition of victim, for me, I fought very hard to have families in, but only last year in the International Criminal Court was the intergenerational effect acknowledged in a different crime, which is rape. But the child born to rape was acknowledged as a primary victim, even though it was as if after the crime, so to speak. So thank you for mentioning that. I wonder, Natalia, if you had any thoughts while your brilliant colleagues were speaking that you'd like to add. And Irina is with us too, so Irina, you would also please go ahead, Natalia.
Я погоджуюся з колегами, але хотіла
Absolutely agree to my colleagues, but I would like to mention the following. We are talking about the environment, which actually, first of all, is a victim per se. And all of us, those, we have to be the advocates of this environment, so that this victim would be recovered and in the future would be in the best possible status for as long as it is possible.
And Anastasia, last but not least.
Дякую.
Thank you. It was very interesting to listen to my colleagues. Alexei, your report impressed me very much. And when you were talking about that there is no need to recover everything the way it used to be, but to use the new approaches, I found the following information. When people in Kherson Oblast were asked what they think about the Kakhovka Dam, soon after the tragedy, people said that we have to restore it, to recover it. But after 12 months, people were asked again, and the dwellers of Kherson, 50% of the dwellers said that there is a scientific research and they said that maybe this dam should not be restored. And in accordance with the results of this survey, 29% of the people who have been affected by the war, and actually they said that they are not going to apply to the psychologists and psychotherapists, and because they have not suffered as bad as other people did. There are a lot of people who suffer more than them. So by completing my intervention, I would say don't wait until you really are damaged mentally. You have to immediately apply to the specialists to restore our mental health, and so that we will be healed, that our traumas will be healed. And I would like to wish all of you take this approach.
Thank you, Alexei. Also, maybe you can comment on an attempt to ensure the viability of the natural environment to protect animals, for example. I remember hearing reports that animals, like pieces of art, were moved to protect them. Can you add anything about that, please?
Так, можу, звичайно. Ну, в більшості випадків
In the majority of cases, we cannot protect the animal life and the wildlife because the explosions, where the explosions take place, we cannot carry out any activities apart from the military activities, military actions. And not only in Ukraine, this problem exists. And in the, well, we won't be able to save the animals during the hostilities. It is impossible. But on the other hand, we have to provide whatever we can do when we can not do anything where the hostilities take place, but we can protect the territories where the hostilities are not going on. Because unfortunately, the social component of the war is harming the environment in a different way. The mass migration of people is taking place. 15 million people have been moved, and some of them are moving inside Ukraine. Some people left the Ukraine. And these are people not only who lost their homes, but a lot of people lost their business. For example, the machinery for agricultural purposes, or these new business is trying to regenerate their own business in the new areas.
If we are not attentive enough to that, we may lose the moment when this moment of people makes the environment worse in safe territories. That's another aspect of the war. So in 2021, ICN drafted the report on how war conflicts affect biodiversity. And what scared me most was that recovery, post-war recovery, in all cases made more damage than the war, because you need a lot of minerals, construction materials. So no one is going to build new cities where previously cities were fully destroyed. That's about, well, they would look for new places to build housing, and for that sake you need a lot of construction materials. So there is that hazard as well. And us now not having access to those territories where there is the war, we cannot do, that's horrible, but we cannot do anything about those territories, but we can wisely protect the territories that are under control now, because it is beneficial for the aggressor, where they cannot attack those territories, but we act in such a way that we undermine the environment there. So we need to be wise, and if at least we keep that part safe, we will definitely have a better future further on, better environment in the future. And that's really a huge problem, challenge, because we may make our environment worse unless we are cautious and wise.
Thank you. I can see that we can, that Maxime, you will write a paper about the meaning of moral. See, we can assign papers to be written from this from this webinar, because we're touching on such important. I mean, I want to say the word global because when we say environmental, it really affects every aspect. Irina, I think you wanted to ask a question, and also, with your permission, I'd ask you to see if there are any of the chats or the questions that should be added to the discussion. Irina, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Hello, colleagues. That's a very engaging webinar. I could not but listen intently. This is the information that gives a lot of food for thought. And regarding questions in the chat, most people express their gratitude and welcome participants. Okay, Anton, thank you for noting that my sound was poor. I hope that it is better now. So I'm checking the chat and I see that in the Ukrainian colleagues are saying hello from participants from different places in Ukraine and in the world. Lots of words of gratitude for the presentations, and I see that you can hear me well now. So let me reiterate that this is a very intense and rich webinar. I listen attentively, and my questions are rather about mechanics of what happens and how that happens. Anastasia mentioned that despite the actual losses, a lot of people experience psychological difficulties. Maxime mentioned more than 8,000 victims in that category of cases. So my question, I guess, goes to Maxime. How the General Prosecutor's Office interacts with those victims? Many of them must be witnesses, right? But they are also very vulnerable. I know that there is a center to support eyewitnesses and victims. So Maxime, maybe you could comment on that because that's something new. That center was established in 2023 and now it has a lot of officers. So you worked before this center existed, and now maybe you can see some advantages or challenges in this work where you provide support
for this important question. I would briefly answer this question because I was not working in the coordination center of the victims and witnesses support. I just want to tell that the concept of the creation of this center stems from the fact that from the Soviet Union time, the criminal justice system in Ukraine tended to focus more on finding the perpetrator of the crime and punishing him. And basically on the conceptual level, the system was not, I would say, built to take care of victims. Of course, victim is a special status within the criminal case, but the concept of the creation of this coordination center was to change the philosophy of criminal justice and criminal proceedings in Ukraine and to take care of victims and witnesses. And at this point, it seems to me that this coordination center is working more focused on the victims and witnesses of international crimes, and then it should expand its work to all crimes that are committed in Ukraine. And the main role, I already shared the policy or a decision to create the center with specifically mentioning its aims and purposes. But basically, this is a separate unit or department within the Prosecutor General's office whose primary task is to be in touch with victims and witnesses of international crimes, to provide them information about how the case is going, on which stage, the contact details of prosecutor and investigator. And also it serves as a render mechanism, basically putting witnesses and victims of international crimes in touch with relevant governmental authorities and agencies like social one, etc., that should provide support in difficult circumstances, and also that is equally important, with the relevant NGOs and organizations, national and international, who also may provide assistance to these people who are suffering.
There's a comment in the chat that is of great interest right now from Tatiana Boyko. There is a need to carry out extensive educational work in Ukraine to develop and raise awareness of personal boundaries, the boundaries of others, and the boundaries of interaction with the environment. I like the way you drew your point. But Alexei also mentioned the need for education. And I think even what you said now, Maxim, it involves educating Ukraine and the Ukrainian justice system on what is it about. Is it reparative or is it retributive, right? Is it only for punishing, finding and punishing the offender, or is it reparative that would include the victim, the society, and the interdisciplinary a conceptual world of morality, victimhood, psychology, right? All of these different dimensions that have to be integrated. So I have sort of a creative question for all of us. Where do we go from here? What are your suggestions as to just, let's say, the panelists today? Where do we go from here to improve the situation? What do you think? So let me, is Alexei here? He had to leave. Oh, right.
So I can comment that I think
okay, we'll go from the last to the first. Okay, so Chris is first. Go ahead.
I wasn't seeking to volunteer, maybe just to say that I think Alexei had put a message in the chat saying that the lights where he was had been turned off and that he was likely to lose his internet connection in the near future.
Oh, yeah, it always happens to us with the Ukraine working and others. Yeah.
Which I think really drives home, or helps to drive home the point of the challenging circumstances that many people are working in order to seek to bring justice, to rehabilitate, to remediate, to restore individuals, environments, and communities. And it's that, I guess, is one aspect, really, in terms then of answering your question, Dr. Danielle. And again, I wouldn't have volunteered to go first because from the international side, I'm not sure that I'm well placed to comment on it, especially if we're speaking Ukraine specific. But I guess I will, keeping it focused on that, I will note that there's been a real exchange, let's say, of ideas and information, and that certainly in terms of education, the international community has quite a substantial amount to learn from the way in which Ukrainian society and individuals are grappling with and seeking to overcome the challenges that they face. And again, from the international justice side of things, looking at Maxim's slides and seeing the extent to which the prosecutor's office in Ukraine is pursuing cases, 321 cases in relation to environmental damage, shows a sort of possibility of seeking to pursue that avenue of justice. And again, it's important for all of us to keep in mind that there are many faces to justice, and even securing criminal convictions is important, but it's not all that's needed. And securing financial compensation for mental pain and anguish, or for demining operations, this is also important, but there are many aspects of seeking to right the wrongs that have to be undertaken.
Natalia? Natalia?
Yes?
What do you believe we should do next?
Що ми маємо робити наступне?
What to do next? Oh, thank the organizers. Organize another webinar on this topic with this audience, but maybe where we can already discuss how we have implemented these preventive measures to preserve the environment. So maybe then we will boast our achievements.
That's brilliant. So we will continue. There's no question we will continue. And I mentioned to you that Irina is the chair of our Ukraine working group. And Irina, if you would invite these wonderful, brilliant people to our next working group, and we can plan some more. I totally agree with you. I do want, Robbie, would you give the floor to Eva Hofmanska, please? Eva is the founder of Yellow Flowers, and we started the Reparative Justice teaching initiative with Yellow Flowers. She has an interesting comment. Eva, would you please briefly and quickly say what you wrote in the chat, and you will be, and we will invite you to again together do the next step. Go ahead, Eva.
Thank you, Eyal. Well, when we talk about preventing the exploitation of the environment in war and general armed conflict, it may feel like something far beyond our individual influence. After all, ordinary people like we don't start wars. Yet, we are the ones who suffer the consequences, including the destruction of nature. That's why, like also Natalia said, I believe awareness does matter. By raising our voices, supporting peace initiatives, and holding leaders accountable, we remind the world that protecting the environment should never be a casualty of war. And of course, the best way to protect our planet from the devastation of the war would simply be not to start wars at all, but until that day comes, we must keep advocating for peace and environmental responsibility for our generation and for those to come. It's pretty simple, I would say.
You mean the easiest way to prevent is simply not to do it? We agree.
Of course, the best way. Absolutely.
Anastasia, would you Do you have a further suggestion, please? Anastasia? Whoops. I think, so Irina, you say the last thing, and then I ask for last words for the remaining people. We lose people to environmental difficulties. Irina, you wanted to add one more issue. Irina?
Дякую. Я тільки за... Yes, thank you. I only now can unmute myself. I actually don't have any additional issues. I think it's a brilliant idea to organize a follow-up webinar on the implementation initiatives. Yes.
Okay, that's a decision of the chair of our working group. Nobody can argue. So, let me ask for your last words before I say see you again very soon. So let's start from the end again. Chris, please. Just last word.
So I've learned a lot from this discussion, and I thank the panel, my fellow panelists, as well as the participants for helping to inform me. I think continuing to engage and have these sorts of discussions can be very valuable. Discussions are one thing, but concrete action can also be called for as well. And not just not just amongst ourselves and our specific professions, not just lawyers, but lawyers with zoologists, with psychosocial experts. I think this multi-societal exchange is exceedingly important in seeking to overcome the multi-generational trauma that arises from environmental harm. So thank you very much to ICMGLT for putting us in contact and for helping to educate me as to a number of these issues.
Thank you. That's the idea. Natalia, please.
Я думала спочатку.
I was thinking about the discussions we had when we were preparing this seminar, that Ukrainians are always thinking about the most important things, and Ukrainians actually are making jokes. And Mabel, I can read this story to finish on the positive note. The commission on the environmental issues is taking place, and the head of the commission says, "Dear colleagues, today we are discussing the degradation of the forests and changes in the environment." And one of the present at this discussion says, the trees are getting dry, and actually the rivers become shallow. So we have no place to drown our enemies or just to hang our enemies on. So thank you very much, and thank you for participating, and glory to heroes and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you. You have to join the group because we need the humor. We need discipline about the humor. Thank you, sweetheart. And Maxime, you helped us organize this very important webinar. And what is your last word, please?
Well, first of all, I'm really grateful to you for convening this conversation. In my opinion, such events really helps to build the supporters and defenders for both, for the environment as a victim and for people suffering in affected areas by the war. So I would like to basically close on a note of shared purpose and to say that much already has been done and the law is evolving, the prosecutors are adapting, investigators are underway, And the environment, once treated as a silent victim of war, now has a growing number of defenders. So let's stay in touch. Let's keep going. Numerous gaps have been identified, so we have a lot of things to do,
Yes.
including on the legal side and accountability side. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I can't wait for our next get together. For all of you, it's good night. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.